This is none of those things. This is like science. But I absolutely love science. Always have since I was a little kid. Was a biology major. Love science. Love the study of life. And I'm also, I would consider myself quite skeptical about things. My wife and I go back and forth, where she's just like, I just believe it. I'm like, I challenge everything. I overanalyze it all. And for me to get to a point where I can say and believe all this stuff took a lot of reading and a lot of thinking and a lot of reflection. But I love science so much, as my wife puts it, I can talk people to death with science. She'll say, "Thanks for the Science Channel. I'm good. Let's move on. Let's move on to a different topic." So I actually am not wanting to go overkill with science. You guys have had this is the 5th sermon in a row on this topic, and so I mean, yeah, if you've endured it, you should get like a T-shirt. I survived the summer evolution series. So I don't want to crush you with science. In fact, this is actually really light on science and a lot more. I'm going to make an analogy and look at kind of an overview. This is my overview thoughts on this topic. And I've got a lot of thoughts, and I could go on in a million different tangents and give you a ton of detail because I love this stuff. But I'm going to try to do the big overview picture. I've way over prepared, and I don't believe in cutting things out, so get ready. I was a teacher for 6 years. I taught high school. I taught biology. I taught evolution in high school. And so since a lot of this is like a teaching, my slides are word heavy. You don't have to read it. I'll speak it out loud. But some people need to read and hear. Some people just read and don't listen. Some people do neither. You're just here, and that's okay. But I'll read a lot from the slides, and that's kind of a teaching thing. And that's this is more of a teaching than a sermon. So I'm going to try to make an analogy that may or may not make any sense. It barely makes sense to me, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I find all of this fascinating, and so see if you can connect the dots with me about evolution and the Tower of Babel. That's not even a thing. I've never read that before. But it's just an analogy. Bear with me. And then I'll get into some actual science towards the end. So my 3 topics, evolution, the apotheosis of science, why evolution, and how that leads to the degradation of morality. There's some big words. I'll make them all make sense. I love big words. Why evolution is a fact. I should say why evolution is considered a fact, and then why evolution is not a fact. And those are the 3 things I want to go over today. Again, I'll try to stay light on the science, but we'll see. So you've heard this scripture a lot. Romans 1:20. This lays it all out for you. I mean, this has probably been presented in every sermon for the last 4 weeks. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Right. On a side note, I love how it acknowledges that God's invisible. It's like, we don't care. Yeah, God's invisible. But it doesn't matter because His power and divinity are seen and understood through what's been made. So men are without an excuse. It just lays it out there. God created all of this, and His divine nature, it can be seen and understood through what has been made. And the more we try to understand it, the more it leads us back to the Creator, which is directly in contrast with what modern-day science would tell you today. So look, I love hiking. I love nature. I don't know if you guys like this, but I love getting outdoors. In fact, it is my favorite thing. It's my hobby. Going backpacking by myself or with the family or camping. I mean, to me, I look at that and it's just like, this is the majesty, in Psalms, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord. I mean, this to me, I just look and go, wow. When He created the heavens and the earth and God looked at it and said, it is good. I'm like, yeah, it is good. And it points right back to a creator. I mean, this is majestic. It's awesome. You've got living things and the moon and the mountains and the plants. And I mean, this stuff blows me away. It gets me excited. I see this as God's handiwork, His signature, just as if someone would create a beautiful painting and write their name at the bottom. This has got God stamped all over it. Like, man, look what I made for you. You look at the heavens and the earth and the stars. If you've ever seen the Milky Way and all that, you go, man, the expanse of the universe is just phenomenal. How would God create all of this just for us? Because He's a loving Father who delights in giving good gifts. He just said, I'm going to blow my creation away. These people that I love so much, I'm going to create this near infinite universe with all these stars and with all these living things. And they're going to just go, wow, this is amazing. Why is this all here? God says, because it's good and I want it to be good for you because I love you. He adores our creation, and I think he's showing off a little bit too. He's got the right to, because he's God. So, God wants to be known as a creator. Your sermon number 2. How many times in the Bible does God say he's a creator God? It was like
264.
Okay, I was way off. 264 times God says he's the creator God. He wants to be known as a creator God. He wants his creation to know him as creator. So all of creation points back to him, who is the author, the creator, and the sustainer of life. He wants us to be amazed by all that he's made. So, here's where I get into this analogy thing. In Judges, it says every man wanted to do what was right in his own eyes. That actually said when there was no king, everyone wanted to do what is right in his own eyes. I think that's it's inherent in our sin nature. Yeah. Going back to Adam and Eve, and they took the apple and they get the knowledge of good and evil, and they suddenly go, wait, I want to fulfill the flesh. I don't want to be held accountable to this God. And I think inherent, intrinsic within the sin nature of man is the desire to do what man wants and not what God wants. But there's something that stands in the way of that, a knowledge and understanding of an almighty God who we're accountable to. So how can mankind escape from being accountable to God in order so that they can do what's right in their own eyes? Summarize it there. But a knowledge and understanding of God always stands in the way of man doing what's right in his own eyes, because there is a God, and we know there's a God because of all that he's made. We're held accountable to him, and not just to ourselves. God is the author and judge of morality. He sets the rules. He's the God, and we're the man. There's no way around that. And all of creation, just boasts the fact that there's an omnipotent, all-powerful, yet loving and amazing God who we are accountable to for a good reason, because we're accountable to him, and that leads to life. But man wants to do what's right in his own eyes. How does he get there? How can he do it? Well, again, bear with me. Analogy time. Going all the way back to the Tower of Babel. And I won't go crazy with Genesis stories because there's some weird ones. The Tower of Babel, originally, I don't even really understand it. It's a unique story. I went back and read it a few times, but somehow men were trying to be defiant towards God. They were trying to defy him. He said, go and spread out, and they're like, no, we're going to stay here, and we're going to build this tower to reach to the heavens. I don't really know what they were trying to do, but I can imagine they were trying to say, look what we can do, building a tower into the heavens, the very dwelling place of God, as an act of defiance to say, look, if we can do this and build a heaven up to where God resides, why should we even have to listen to him? Look what we can do on our own accord, with our own ability, with our own minds, with the work of our hands. It seems like it was an act of defiance. And if they could defy God, maybe they wouldn't be accountable to him, and they could do what's right in their own eyes and finally be free from having to be accountable to God. As you all know, the Tower of Babel never got finished, and we'll come back to that. So mankind says, okay, we can't challenge God. And when I say mankind, who's the deceiver in all of this? It's Satan. I don't know if you've ever read Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. It's an eloquently written, tale of kind of how the devil might try to trick and deceive man as Screw Tape is writing to Wormwood, his demon cousin or something. And so think of it along those lines, like a screw tape letter. So what else could mankind do in order to challenge God, in order to get away from being accountable to him? They can't deny his existence because of what has been made. They couldn't challenge him with the Tower of Babel. So what if they could replace God? I could see Satan going, okay, we'll just get them to replace God with other gods, with false gods. And as we know through the history of mankind in the Bible, there's been all sorts of variety of false gods. And many of those false gods have allowed people to give in to the desires of their flesh. A lot of pagan religions do some really, sick things and give in to some very immoral desires of the flesh. And so the devil tricks man. What if we had gods that let us do what we want to do to fulfill the desires of our flesh? We would be willing to be accountable to them. So man makes his own gods. He makes idols and false gods. But the problem there, even with those false gods, man is still beholden to a higher power of some sort, even if it's a demonic power. And they still have an understanding, too, that if they're accountable to their gods, what if there's a more powerful God? They still have an understanding of a deity. And many of them often did encounter the one true God and say, whoa, this God is way more powerful than ours. You read about Nebuchadnezzar, or Darius, when they understood the one true God and the power he had over their gods. So this still entertains an understanding that there is a divine power that men are held accountable to. So how could mankind be tricked into believing that they're finally free from submitting completely to divine authority, and therefore be even further enslaved to their sinful desires? So this is, I think, it's been a plan of the devil since the beginning of time. He wants man to be able to eliminate God. Eliminate him completely from the picture. How could we get mankind to totally take God out as even an option? It's a tough thing because, as we learned in Romans 1:20, that man has no excuse. We can see and understand from all that has been made that there really is a God. So how do we take God out of the picture? And when I see it looking back throughout history, these small, feeble nations, each speaking their own separate languages, they have no means of ever coming up with a valid excuse to not believe in a creator. But the devil was very patient, and he just waited and bid his time. Coming back to this Tower of Babel thing, just an analogy. Bear with me. Genesis 11:5-7. But the Lord came down into the city of Babel, and looked at the tower that men were building. And he said, if as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their languages so they'll not understand each other. That's a unique passage. Then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them if they could speak one language. Again, God sees what mankind's trying to do in their defiance, and he says, I'm going to mess up their languages for a while. And that stopped their progress there. But over time, what's happened to language on Earth? Languages have increasingly condensed. Mathematics is a universal language, the language of math. My mom and I have talked about this for years, but math is a universal language in every country. Science has increasingly become a universal language. English is the dominant language of science. And I don't know how many of y'all have Google Translate on your phone. I mean, I can speak all the languages in the world right here. We've increasingly condensed our language, and man, through his intellectual prowess, has used the combined sum of worldwide intellect to start to be able to pick apart the things that we once attributed to God. And this unification of language really plays a role in all of that. So what have we been able to do with a more unified language? In the past, and this is from Romans 1:22, although men claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for idols. But more recently, we've exchanged the glory of immortal God for science or evolution itself. Things that have historically been attributed to God have now been explained and replaced by science. The mysteries of the universe, the heavens, the storms and rain, health and healing, and life itself are now understood with science. We're replacing God, and the once where we said man had no excuse for believing in God, now we're replacing that with science. Now I will say, and it comes up in a second, I'm not anti-science by any means. It's the way that mankind is using science. This term, have you ever heard of it? The Apotheosis of Science. That's a term that I came across years ago, and I actually heard someone use it on TV. It's a real word, and I couldn't believe it when I heard it. So I was like, "What?" I thought that was like a word in Webster's that got buried in ancient time. The Apotheosis of Science. It's a real term, and apotheosis basically just means the elevation to divine status. And science really has been elevated to divine status in more ways than one. If science is the city of Babylon, evolution is its tower. I'll come back to that. Men now have an excuse. They really do. Romans 1:20 says men are without excuse because of all that has been made. Well, now men think they have an excuse because of what science can explain. They think they have an explanation for all that is made, including life itself. I've heard people say this. This is not a joke. I don't believe in God anymore. I believe in science. I don't know if you've heard people say that. I've heard stories, I've talked with people personally as well. I've heard other anecdotal stories of people say, I was raised in the church, Bible-believing family. I went and learned about science. I learned about evolution. It caused me to question God, and then it led me to completely turn away from God, and now I don't believe in him at all. And that's not just like, oh, that couldn't really happen to someone. No, it really does, and on a much wider scale than I think that we're willing to accept. That people are turning their backs on God because they say, look what science can say, look what science can prove. We don't have to believe in God anymore. Neil Tyson deGrasse. Have you heard of this guy? Brilliant astrophysicist. He's really a spokesperson for science now. He was the guy that did that Cosmos series that came on TV, which if you watch, it's hard for me to watch because there's so many fallacies in it and so many things to string people along and deceive them. But at any rate, really smart guy. Read with me what he has to say here. I know this is wordy, but this is... He says, historically, when it comes to science and scientists, God has always been the God of the gaps, which is actually not true. Most scientists in the past were very godly, and he's basically saying that scientists only attributed things to God when they didn't understand it, which is not at all true. This is the way he sees it, and this is the way people buy into what he says, hook, line, and sinker. Where there's a gap in our understanding, we have inserted God as the explanation. If that's how you want to invoke the evidence for God, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance.
Wow.
In other words, as science continues to explain everything there is about the universe, what we can't explain with science is getting smaller and smaller, that ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. He said that's all that God is, and it's getting smaller and smaller. He said, we're tackling the mysteries of the universe one by one. And if you're going to stay religious at the end of the conversation, then God has to be more to you than just where science has yet to tread. So to the person who says maybe dark matter is God, which, by the way, dark matter to physicists, they don't really understand it. But it's there, it holds the whole universe together. But he says maybe dark matter is God. Well, if the only reason you're saying that's because it's a mystery, then get ready to have that undone. And this guy is very bold, very pompous and when he's talking about this. And he is... not just anti-God or agnostic or atheist, but almost aggressively so. And it'll come up again. But if you were to get into a conversation about intelligent design or God or creation with him, he would just flat out say, "You're completely ignorant. You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't even deserve to be in this conversation with me," and you get shut off. It's an incredible bully pulpit. So here's my timeout because I'm anti-science. I love science. Anyone else love science? You love studying science? I am floored by science. Science is not the problem. It's not inherently evil. It's wonderful. I really do. I was a kid reading science textbooks left and right. I love science. And for me, I see that God gave us a complex mind to use science to explore and understand and manipulate the universe around us, the universe He created. Science to me always points back to God. The more we use science to understand the world around us, the more it illuminates us to how incredibly amazing and brilliant and awesome His creative power was. And that's the way I see science. Science is not bad. But the problem is this. Because of evolution, it allows for the removal of God from science. The starting point that people now start with when they say, I'm gonna follow science and see where it takes me, they start without a belief in God, and so it leads them down a path just further and further away from God. How do they write it? Because since evolution allows for the removal of God from the explanation of life, it shifts how all science is framed, allowing all of it to be observed and pursued from a point of view that does not include the Creator. That's where the problem is, and that's where people are saying, I don't believe in God, I believe in science, because science can explain everything that we once attributed to God. That's a problem. Why is it a problem? Oh, here's my last part of this analogy. So, if science is the city of Babylon, and what do I mean by that? You read in Revelation about Babylon the Great, and it is an end times great deception of man. It's a great, it plays a huge role in the final downfall of man. And science, and with the tenet of evolution, has done its best to replace God entirely. So it is kind of, I see as a thing that the devil's been working on since the beginning of time. How do we replace God? This city of Babylon, which stands in great defiance against God. And science has really become that in many ways. Well, if science is the city, then evolution is the tower. It's the scientific idea that is most defiant to God, because it stands up and says, nope, God didn't create life. It just happened. And all of the diversity of life on earth just came about through natural processes. And that's an insult to a creator God who made life as his very finest masterpiece. So evolution is the tower, and it's the scientific idea that's most defiant to God. This idea that man has made and continues to advance, and he builds upon it through the unified language of science. It not only reaches to the heavens where God resides, it's intended to replace God himself. Just like the original Tower of Babel. which was to be built in defiance. This is a figurative, this is an analogy, but evolution I see is this, like this man-made thing that they've built up through the unified language of mathematics and science that says, you don't exist, God, we challenge you, we take you out of the picture. And it's an insult, and it's more than just being an insult, it's a tragedy because of the results. What happens next? What are the consequences? Well, what are the big consequences of removing God from the picture? First and foremost, you take God out of the picture, people are not believing in God or Jesus, his son. They're spiritually dead, and they have to pay the price for their sins. They don't know the redemptive power, the saving grace of Jesus Christ. That is the biggest problem with all of this. It's removing God from the picture. So people, when you talk to them about Jesus, say, there is no God. Science explains all this other stuff. You can't talk to me about that. That's the biggest tragedy. There are other consequences to society, to morality. And I think you talked some about these, Dad, in some of your other messages. But science and evolution has led to the advancement of materialistic or naturalistic mentality. Naturalism says that everything on earth exists, everything in the universe through natural processes. There's nothing supernatural. Materialism said all that we are is the physical material. There's nothing spiritual. Secular humanism basically says that we can achieve morality and goodness and a good society just through secular means without invoking God or a religious moral authority. So all of that has come to pass in the 20th century, and this was heavily influenced by the expanding understanding of the theory of evolution. Evolution influenced eugenics. I think you mentioned Hitler. I mean, this is well documented that eugenics and Hitler's attempt to commit genocide against the Jewish people and against anyone who had genetic defects, which was heavily influenced by evolution. This is a big thing. I learned this when I was studying, science in college. Science is an inability to prove a moral right or wrong. No one disagrees with this. In fact, this came from a UC Berkeley website. It says science helps us to describe how the world is, but it cannot make any judgments about whether that state of affairs is right, wrong, good, or bad. Science cannot prove a moral right or wrong. And therefore, if science is your God, you have no moral compass. You have no definitive point of morality to say this is right and this is wrong. What does that result in? Mankind can do whatever's right in his own eyes. Science can't tell me what to do. I don't believe in God. I'm left to just do what feels right to me, which is always going to lead to you following the sinful natures of your flesh, which is going to lead to death and destruction. So science can't prove a moral right or wrong. If science is your God, it cannot guide you. I just said that. This leads to moral degradation of society. There's an interesting... These are woven together. 1962, the Supreme Court voted to take prayer out of public schools. You cannot directly attribute this to the expansion of the theory of evolution, but there are some strong tie-ins. The Supreme Court justices who made this decision were mostly all liberal Supreme Court justices put on the court by FDR, who had a very long time to fill the court with Supreme Court justices. Many of them were trained in universities, very liberal universities that were pushing secular humanism, that were teaching evolution at the time, back in the late 20s and 30s, when they were in college. I believe that there is a tie-in. The rise of evolution and the rise of secular humanism and atheism in the first part of the last century helped to affect this decision, taking prayer out of public schools. This was a huge deal. This was a big blow. And over time, not only did we remove prayer, but public schools began to teach evolution, all of them. And public schools have effectively endorsed agnostic rationalism as the established civil religion, with naturalistic evolution as creator. It's kind of a wordy statement, but that's powerful. I mean, that's very true. That's what our public schools are doing. We've replaced God with agnostic rationalism, and the creator is now naturalistic evolution. So why is this a problem? The moral degradation of America was strongly... made worse by this decision. Since prayer has been removed from public schools, you ever hear correlation doesn't indicate causation? That's very true. Just because things correlate just because things go along together doesn't mean that you can prove a cause. But I really do believe that since the removal of prayer in public schools, we've seen a degradation, a slipping downward and a slope towards worse morality in America. Again, you've probably seen a lot of these statistics. This is one I've seen. I don't even know where it comes from, but I've seen this a lot of times. 1940 versus 1990, top problems in school, talking out of turn, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, etc., versus drug abuse, alcohol abuse, pregnancy, suicide, rape, robbery, and assault in high school. There's a slight difference between those two lists. There's a ton of statistics, and a lot of these are well documented and are really backed up. A lot of these are irrefutable statistics. Some of them are questionable, but criminal arrest of teens up, violent crime up, teen suicide up, teen pregnancy rates up, young girls getting pregnant up, illegal drug use way up, divorce rates up. 53 million babies have been killed since 1973, which is obviously a post-removal of prayer in public schools. When children went to school and they had a prayer every day, they had some idea in their mind of there is a greater power that I'm held accountable to. As soon as the government said, nope, we're not going to do that, there is no God, we're going to teach you about evolution, and it's all natural processes, there is no God, where's your moral compass? If you're not raised in the church, if you're not one of these kids who's here in the church and you're raised by parents who are guiding you and you're not raised by godly Christian principles, where's your compass? I taught in high school. A lot of my kids, I saw them more than their own parents did, or parent did, or guardian did. And if the school is influencing the kid more than the home, and they're getting nothing in church, and the school is just saying, do whatever you want, make up your mind, do what feels good. And you say, oh, that's schools aren't really, saying that. Schools are not supplying any sort of moral compass for kids. They're just not, and it's unfortunate. And taking prayer out of schools was a big blow to our society from a moral standpoint. So it's worth fighting for. As my dad has said, this is something worth fighting for. It's something standing up and saying, no, I'm not just going to sit there quietly and let the people from the bully pulpit push us around and call us ignorant and say, you don't know what you're talking about. This is you're not even, you have no understanding of science, and we're way smarter than you, so you can't talk about this. It's worth standing up and saying, no, we believe that God created, that there is an intelligent designer, and that it is something that needs to be taught to our kids. It needs to be a part of our public discourse. I don't know if prayer will ever be put back in public schools, but I do believe that having intelligent design taught in schools is an attainable goal. I think that's something that's worth pushing for. If children are taught that there could be, even if there could be an intelligent designer, an all-powerful creator, they might believe somewhere in their knower that they might be accountable to a higher power. And when they're presented with the gospel, and they already have a belief in an intelligent designer or creator deity, they might be more willing to accept it. You say, let me tell you about this Jesus. And you go, hey, it sounds like this intelligent designer I learned about, once. That's made me and made the plants and the animals and the universe. So I think it's worth fighting for. It's worth pushing for. It's worth engaging in, and not just shying back into the shadows and saying, oh, we don't know what we're talking about because we're ignorant church people, and these really smart scientists can push us around. So that's part one. That was my introduction. The other stuff, I have a lot less words with the rest of it, but I felt those are my general thoughts. When I look at this topic, these thoughts mull around in my mind all the time. Having been inside. By the way, when I taught evolution, I never pushed it as fact. I taught them the stuff so they could get the questions right on the textbook, but I threw in as many questions and this, I said, here's what scientists say. I couldn't teach creation, and I didn't, but I certainly tried to get them to at least question what I was teaching, which is good in any science anyways. Question what you're taught. So moving on to part two, why is evolution considered a fact? Here's this guy, Neil Tyson deGrasse. Sorry to pick on him. Pray for him. He says, some claim that evolution is just a theory, as if it were merely an opinion. But evolution, like the theory of gravity, is scientific fact. Evolution really happened. Accepting our kinship with all life on earth is not only solid science, in my view, it's also a soaring spiritual experience. People, he'll talk about the afterlife and all this, and how he believes, it's so spiritual how he's going to dissolve and go back into the earth, and because that's all that there is. But here's the one I want to point out. But like the theory of gravity, evolution is scientific fact, period. And if you say something contrary to that, and it's documented, he says, you are completely ignorant. You do not deserve a seat at the table where there's a scientific discussion taking place. And this is how science on all universities is taught in high school level. The media believes all of this. This is, they control the microphone, so to speak, and it is a bully pulpit where they will push you around and push you out of the conversation. Don't let them. So here are there's where we get to some natural science, two false interpretations of God's design of living things. Here's two reasons why evolution, why they say, oh, it's totally a fact, and why they're totally wrong. You see, look at it, there's a human arm. Look at the bones, these color-coordinated bones. Human arm, cat arm, whale arm, flipper, and bat wing. All of these structures do a similar movements. The arm can grasp, the cat swing its arm, that whale flipper can flap as it's swimming, and the bat will fly. Well, what does a scientist say when he looks at these, the evolutionists? He goes, man, see that bone structure? It's the same in all these different animals. They had to have a common ancestor who had that same bone structure. And then they all evolved, and they just kept the same bone structure in all of those limbs. Of course, it had to be that way, right? DNA is another thing where they look at the similarities and they say, oh, it has to come from a common ancestor. This I pulled off a slide from a lecture on evolution. It says the genetic code's nearly universal. All living things use DNA inside their cells as their code for proteins. So what is the reason? The code must have evolved very early on. Life on Earth must share a common ancestor because they all use DNA. Bones are the same. There's a lot of structures. There's a lot of molecules. There's a lot of things that are similar between different animals. So, why is evolution a fact? Because similarities between organisms prove they came from a common ancestor. Fact. Well, it is a fact that anatomical and molecular structures are very similar. All living things share DNA sequences, share DNA as their molecule for genetic information. But, let's say you're making a car. Why would a creator reinvent the wheel for every car he's making? If a limb moves in these motions and it works well for one organism, why would you recreate the bone structure for a new organism? What we are observing is not common descent, but common design. And to me, it screams common design. When I look at the science, I'm like, wow, it all is the same signature, the same handiwork of the same creator God. DNA is an incredibly elegant molecule. I could go on and on about the elegance of that spiral alpha helix and the way that it holds together and carries this genetic sequence that then can be copied and reproduced in cell after cell to pass that information on. It's amazing. It's an amazing medium for containing information at a molecular level. Why would God reinvent it with every organism? It just doesn't make sense. A painter doesn't reinvent his style with every painting, or a sculptor. You can look at one sculpture or another and say, oh, that's Michelangelo, because I see the way that they sculpted that. Why would you reinvent the wheel for everything? It screams to me common design. But the evolutionists say, nope, common ancestor. Clearly, it's a fact. It's a fact. There's no other explanation for it. Second thing, adaptation. Evolutionists would say adaptation of a species is observable, which it actually is. And if you throw in some mutations at a whole lot of time, these adaptations can create all the species on Earth. Well, this is a marine iguana, which lives on the Galapagos Islands. Darwin himself observed these creatures and said, wow, there's something really different about these types of iguanas. They live in the salt water. They have these short, stubby faces. They've got different dentition. Their teeth are a little different to scrape algae off the rocks. They've got bigger claws and these short, stubby legs to really hold on to the rocks in the waves smashing, in the slow motion waves smashing against the rocks. They've got these flat tails that allow them to swim like a crocodile. They even have a specialized gland to help them excrete extra salt that they take in through their environment. So they say, wow, look at how these organisms adapted to their environment with all these unique features. Well, that actually is observable, and it actually is a fact that species, not an individual organism, but a species as a whole can adapt to their environment. Right. And the evolutionists would say, well, if we know they can adapt to an environment and we can observe that, then why couldn't one species just become another one with enough time? They make these great giant leaps in assumption without ever having to see it. But of course, because they start with a place that there's no God, it's really easy for them to do this because there's no other explanation. So we know that natural selection allows a species to adapt or change, so they're better suited to survive in their particular environment. That's a fact. God created variation within the DNA code that can be differentially expressed through sexual reproduction. Think positive and negative traits. You ever seen attached earlobes and detached earlobes? You ever seen blue eyes and brown eyes, lighter skin and dark skin? There's variation within the genetic code, within the DNA information for the human species alone. And those variations can be expressed differently, and that will allow some people to be better suited for certain environments. Look at the tropical latitudes and the darker skin of the people that have traditionally lived there. God created those variations within the genetic code of a species to allow for adaptations and variation that allows those organisms to survive better in different environments. He knew that. The species would not be able to survive in this dynamic world that God created if everyone had the exact same genes. However, in order for evolution to take place, brand new genes have to spontaneously come about to create new species. That's never been observed. The mechanism has never been, it just doesn't work. And so again, there's this great jump from seeing some real observable adaptations and then applying it and saying, well, we can go from goo to you with enough time. We can go from a single-celled organism to a human with enough time just through these adaptation changes involving mutation and a bunch of time. So they take a little bit of what's true, what I see as something that God put into species. He created some variation. The way that the genes mix together when two organisms reproduce that allows for new variations to be expressed from that genetic code is awesome. It's wonderful. It's great. It's something God created. But scientists take that and then pervert it and say, no, it just proves evolution. All right, another reason. Why is evolution true? Evolution is true because scientists say it's true.
Yeah. There you go.
Is that a reason for it to be true? It is in their minds. This gets me. So, who are we to doubt scientists? Science is altruistic, right? It's so pure. They just go wherever the facts lead. You know, they would never lie to you. And by the way, scientists are way smarter than us. Way smarter than us. We have no reason to ever challenge anything a scientist says. Just like a doctor, we can never challenge what a doctor says. They're always right. Never ever challenge a doctor. You know, a lot of people think this. A lot of people think this way. You may have caught yourself thinking this way. Oh, they're way smarter than me. They went to school for this. They study this. I don't know this. They're telling me it's right. It must be right. Who am I to challenge this? Wrong. Scientists are people just like you and I who are fallible, who have preconceived notions and prejudices. And as I write down here, science is so often biased, agenda-driven, politically motivated, and influenced and perverted by money. If you read primary literature and you really talk to people that produce the actual scientific research that our textbooks are based upon, the grant money, the whole soft money thing plays it really perverts real science because people will, I don't want to say, I mean, sometimes they do make up fake data, but what they'll do is they'll withhold certain data or they'll use statistics to their advantage. You've heard that thing? There's what is it, lies, and statistics? Or
How to lie with statistics.
How to lie with statistics. Yeah, they will manipulate and selectively present the data in a way to prove their preconceived point of view. And that has been proven. There's been people that have fessed up to this over the years, professors that have said, oh, we totally withheld this part of the research and this part of the data because we didn't want to lead people to a different conclusion than we wanted to lead them to. Science is not completely altruistic. It is not. Science, they say, science just goes wherever the facts lead them. Well, that's it. That's not true at all. It's really not. And it's really sick. And if you talk to some PhD type people that do this stuff, it gets really crazy at the university level. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of one person trying to get their research published over the other, so they make their stuff seem like it proves a point better than the other. Right. It's not right. So evolution is a fact because scientists and those who want to be taken seriously by scientists, they have to believe it. So if evolution is true just because scientists say it's true, we have to believe them. And the scientists themselves have to believe it because if not, they're not going to be taken seriously by any other scientists. You can lose your job, as my dad has pointed out. You literally lose your job if you come out against any of this. Lose your job at a university as a professor if you say, you know what, this intelligent design stuff, maybe we should look into it. Maybe our science of evolution doesn't all add up. Well, they have to believe it. There is no choice. Believe it and promote it or lose your job and credibility. This is Neil Tyson deGrasse again. Science is a philosophy of discovery. Intelligent design is a philosophy of ignorance. Yeah. Again, that bully pulpit. Believe it or else you are what? You're ignorant. You're stupid. You don't have to deserve a right at the table. to talk about this. The truth is, and this is one of my most favorite quotes that I read recently, most scientists believe in evolution not because of the evidence, but because most scientists believe it. This is so stinking true. And when I read this, I was like, yes, I'm so glad someone wrote it out so, concisely like that. Most scientists believe in evolution not because of the evidence or the facts, but because most scientists believe it. You ever read the story of the emperor and his new clothes? Yeah. Scientists are not willing to say, he's naked! They're not willing to look at evolution and go, this doesn't make any sense. We do not have a scientific explanation to explain, in particular, the molecular diversity and the molecular complexity of life. But no one's willing to say it, because as soon as you do, you're ignorant, get out, you're done. So some scientists really believe this, and they really think they understand it all, but they actually don't know all the details. And when they're asked, they're like, oh, actually, I don't really know. Some just don't even care to know. They just believe it on faith, because they want to believe it, because they have to believe it, because the other scientists say it's true. It's really sick. Oh my goodness. Last slide with a ton of words, I promise. But please, listen to this. This guy, Professor James Stewart, is one of the 10 most cited chemists in the world. Renowned he's a molecular chemist. He was asked about evolution and how all these molecular, the molecular complexity of inside cells is mind-boggling. It'll blow your mind, literally. He says, let me tell you what goes on in back rooms of science with National Academy members, Nobel Prize winners. I've sat with them. And when you get them alone, not in public, because it's a scary thing, if you say just what I said, I say, do you understand all this, where all this came from and how this happens? Talking about life, talking about biochemicals, talking about the evolution of life. What do they say? Every time I've sat with people who are synthetic chemists who understand this, they go, nope. Nobel Prize winners, National Academy of Science. These people are just so far off on how to believe all this stuff came together. I sat with National Academy members, with Nobel Prize winners. Sometimes they'll say, do you understand this? And if they're afraid to say yes, they say nothing. They just stare at me because they can't sincerely do it. That's crazy. This last one, I was in Israel not too long ago talking with a bioengineer. He was describing to me the ear. He was studying the different changes in the modulus of the ear. And I said, how does this come about? Through naturalistic evolution. And he says, oh, Jim, we all believe evolution, but we've no idea how it happened. And he went on to say, there's a good Jewish person for you, just real honest, like, oh, Jim, we all believe this, but we have no idea how it happened. These are, renowned scientific people. So again, why is evolution a fact? They take some bits of the truth and then they pervert it and expand upon it in ways that are not true. It's a fact because they say it's a fact. And they will bully you around and call you ignorant and say, no, we believe it. But when you really get down to it, they don't know themselves. And they're not willing to say the emperor has no clothes on. It's crazy. And when oh my goodness, I watched that series on the Cosmos series, and the stuff that they were saying about, they were just making these assumptions, why this is totally a fact, you don't need religion, there is no God. It was insulting, the leaps that they made, and as just assuming people like sheep would go along with them and say, these scientists are so smart, I'll believe whatever they say, and they were so wrong, and it was just, and it's deception. It's a plan that the enemy's hatched since the beginning of time.
Exactly.
Here's something, this is a 2014 from Nature, which is a publication, one of the top biological scientific publications. Does evolutionary theory need a rethink? In other words, these are people saying, maybe we need to relook at this. In their own inner circles, this is the kind of stuff they talk about. I read about, just last year, they had this big conference at the Royal Academy of Science in London where they sat down and basically said, there are problems. We need to figure out how to explain with science all of this emerging new complexity of life that we're discovering at a molecular level, at a biochemical level. And they won't say, well, maybe it's intelligent design, but they'll actually admit to each other, what we have now doesn't cut it, doesn't explain it. Of course, evolution is still a fact, of course, because there's no God. But they are, in their inner circles, they're going, we got work to do. This is the last part. Why is evolution a fact? Because man's sin nature wants it to be true. This is where you get this interplay of the deception of the enemy plus man's own intrinsic sinful nature. Whether consciously or subconsciously, mankind, the sinful nature of man, I should say, needs evolution to be true to continue to pursue the desires of the flesh without a notion of being accountable to God. So I believe there's a mixture of deception from the enemy as well as a willful choosing to be ignorant to the facts that results in this unwavering adherence to evolution. Why is it a fact? Well, because deep down inside, I do not want creation to be true. I'm not saying this. This is what the man's sinful nature says. Because I feel really good doing the things that I want to do. I love sin. Sin is great. I'm having a blast. Woo-hoo. I mean, they're totally deceived and enslaved to that sin. But the flesh will tell you, come on, give in to it, go for it. But if there's a God, you're accountable to that God. And suddenly, I cannot continue to live this lifestyle, because I'm accountable to God. So I think that whether people will admit it or not, that plays a role in their unwavering adherence to the theory of evolution. Nope, can't be creation, has to be evolution, because deep down inside I really don't want there to be a God, because I want to continue living my life the way I want to live it. People won't admit to that, but I seriously believe that plays a major role in people being so stuck on evolution. This is the last little bit. I know it's noon. I can fly these last couple of slides. There's not a lot of words here.
Go ahead.
As long as you all, I told you I had a student once, he said, Mr. Fox, he actually sighed, he went, and I was like, yes, do you have a question? He goes, oh, Mr. Fox, you was talking me to death. I told Dan, my brother-in-law is a teacher too, why evolution is not a fact. A few quick things. Here's I could go on, way on here, but with the origin of life, here's one of the biggest reasons why you could just say, this doesn't cut it. The origin of life. Here's a paramecium, a single-celled organism. Incredible complexity. Oh, look how simple it is. Nope. It is ridiculously complex. Here's a simple bacteria cell. These are supposed to be the earliest, simplest forms of life on Earth. They are not simple. Just the DNA alone in there, the genes, the genetic information in there, crazy, the ribosomes that help make proteins, the different parts, way complex. So you have to ask the question, if naturalistic evolution explains all life on Earth, how did it start? Pose that.
Yeah.
I've done this. I did this recently with a colleague of mine, and he's like, we don't know. But totally adherent to the theory of evolution, totally adherent to his belief that there's no God. How did it all start? The simplest forms of life are still incredibly complex. There's no scientific explanation for how the first cells came into existence through a natural process. None. Go ask Richard Dawkins, go ask whoever is the biggest spokesperson, Neil Tyson deGrasse himself. They don't have any explanation for how life, not one that makes any sense. They'll talk about crystals, they'll talk about bubbles that somehow got, the bubbles. I mean, it's great. You listen to them and you're like, do you hear yourself talking? You're talking about bubble to a living thing, just spontaneous, like that. And why do they say, well, we're here. And it had to happen. The only explanations are it happened on its own, life came from somewhere else, like aliens, that panspermia theory, or it was created. Those are the only options. No one's ever come up with anything else other than those three. Came about spontaneously, implanted here, which then begs the question, where did that life come from? Or it was created. And so intellectuals will go on and on studying and furthering the theory of evolution without having any idea of how it started in the first place. And they don't even care. They just believe it by faith. They just, we're here. We know that evolution's a fact. Life had to have happened. We just can't explain it yet. But we'll get there, as Neil Tyson deGrasse says. It's an ever-shrinking pocket. God is just an ever-shrinking pocket of scientific ignorance. The information within your cells, man, DNA is so elegant and amazing. It's a code. It's instructions for building molecular machines. A protein is a molecular machine. So very simple, very quickly, DNA strand carries these sequences of nucleotides that are a code for amino acids. All right, I got a little science. Amino acids are put together in chains and then they're folded into proteins. The shape of the protein determines what it does. And when I say machines, it's amazing what some of these protein machines can do and how complex they are. If you change one amino acid in the sequence, which can be hundreds of amino acids long, you change one, that changes the whole shape of the protein, which will change its function. It is incredibly specific. It is written instructions for a machine. Think of a blueprint, for a car. These are very specific instructions. Here's a three-dimensional look at a protein. This is a protein that pumps potassium through a cell membrane. It uses energy. It changes shape when it pumps it. All those little circles in the picture on the left represent atoms within the amino acids, within the protein. If you change one part of this, it'll shift the shape. It'll shift the function. All of the instructions for that are in DNA. And you have a ton of instructions in your DNA. I had a video, it didn't work, but have you ever seen the kinesin protein?
Yes.
It is cute. This thing walks. It literally walks. It uses energy, it uses ATP, and it walks down these microtubules carrying packets of proteins from one place to another. It is like the transporter in the cell, and it walks. And the instructions for that are written in DNA in your cells.
Have you ever seen it?
So information is independent from the medium in which it's written. This is a key thing for the origin of life and why this theory of naturalistic evolution falls apart. If you were to write a book, you write it with ink and paper. That's the media. But the message comes from the author.
Right.
DNA is the media. The information embedded within the DNA came from the author.
Right.
It came from a creator. Scientists say the earliest cells had DNA in them. So this is a chicken and egg thing with a very obvious answer. You don't put ink on paper to make a cohesive book without first having a preconceived idea in your head. Information doesn't spontaneously come about. They say that DNA just came about together to make those first bits of information for the cell. Well, information doesn't just spontaneously happen. The information comes first, and it's independent from the media in which it's held in. There's an intelligent designer, a creator God, who had the information that then crafted an incredibly elegant molecule to house that information in DNA. But that information came first. The plan came first. In the beginning, there was God before all of this. The problem with getting new information, human DNA is made up of about 3 billion bits of information, we'll just say. These 3 billion letters. They're arranged in a specific order, and they write the code for all the proteins to make us a human. Even the simplest cells might have 4 million bits of information. So here's where it all falls apart. Evolution says that the mechanism by which new information, new DNA codes can come about is through mutations. A mutation is an error. A mutation is an oops. A mutation is we got it wrong when you're copying DNA, when you're making new cells. Well, evolution says that all of the 3 billion specifically sequenced bits of information that make all the proteins that make you a human came about through random errors over time. Give enough time and anything can happen, guided by Mother Nature, says the evolutionist. This is so ridiculously illogical, and it's mathematically insulting. And when you run the numbers, and these numbers are out there, and they've got no way to overcome them, just the odds of a single ribosome gene coming about through random errors, the probability, the chance is 4 times 10 to 300, which, if you know anything about numbers and logarithmic expressions, there's tons of these written numbers out there where they've run the probability. It's a number so large it could not possibly happen by chance in the 13 billion year, which is how long the scientists will say the age of the universe is. In 13 billion years that they attribute to the age of the universe, there's not a chance, probability-wise, mathematically, that this could happen for just one single protein that is vital for all living things, these ribosomes. It is illogical. Oh, I wrote logical. It's illogical and mathematically indefensible. I like saying it that way. This is mathematically indefensible. I wish I could go on and on with slides about how all the different ways they look at the probability of this. It is insane, the probability involved in randomly, through errors, getting the complexity of information that makes up you and I. It is crazy, but we're here. It had to have happened. Let's focus on something else.
Right.
Man, it's insane. So the very last thing is the evolution of instincts. This is published this year, Evolution of Instincts. You can't even read this, but it says, little is known about how animals acquire the instincts that enable such innate behaviors, such as spiders spinning webs or dolphins being able to use echolocation. This is published like in May or something of this year. The data's in there. We don't know how instincts work, where they came from. There's no good proposed mechanisms. There are not DNA genes for instincts, but yet the sum of all of the genetic information in an organism, somehow, you've heard the saying, the sum is greater than its parts. The sum of all that allows for organisms to have these innate instincts that allows them to do incredible things. You ever hear about monarch butterflies?
Right.
They start out in Mexico in this one little place, and then they fly north, like up to 2,500 miles north, up through the United States, all into Canada. It takes some of them 3 generations to get to their final destination point. And then that 3rd generation offspring monarch butterfly will suddenly fly back to the same spot in Mexico where it was born. It is a small location. No one taught it. No one showed it how to do that. They will fly back on their own to the exact spot, like they've got GPS, like they've got a calendar, like they've got, just trying to figure out how this little simple insect can do this, and yet that information is encoded within the actual physical media in this animal. How could a series of random errors over I don't care how much time you give it, result in an instinct that allows for something so specific and so grand as this? It's unfathomable. A spider web. Well, this is the last slide, the thing I've got here. I was hiking once by myself. I sat down by a creek. I was actually making a cup of coffee from some mountain water. I filtered mountain water, making a cup of coffee. Sun's coming through the trees. I'm by myself. I hadn't seen another person that whole day, and I'm watching a spider make a web. And I'm watching the elegance of him spinning this web and thinking about the physics involved in stringing these strings up with the right amount of tension to catch an insect. And don't you know that the structural framework that a spider uses to build a web is different every time, and yet it's just born with the ability to use the existing environment to spin a perfect web in order to catch an insect so it can eat and then carry on its life. And it's just born with the understanding of how to do that, and with the biochemicals in order to spin silk, which is way stronger than steel per its size and weight, which is protein. Silk is just proteins, which is encoded for in the spider's DNA. I'm watching this spider build a web, and I'm just like mind blown, thinking about how God put the information within that living organism to be able to do this. Mm-hmm. And there's no explanation from a scientific standpoint of view. No one can even begin. I mean, you can talk about the flight of birds. I mean, there's a million different examples where science really has no valid explanation to explain things like this that are embedded within life. And so for me, as this is the very last slide, the way I see it, the more we use science to discover and explain the world around us, the greater the understanding we have of the wonderfully divine craftsmanship of our magnificent Creator God. I see all of science, all of nature, all of living things, the spider spinning his web, pointing right back to God, saying, there's the Creator. You're looking at it right now. Mankind has no excuse because we can see the divine nature of our Creator God through what has been made. And for me, it's exact opposite, where Neil Tyson deGrasse says, oh, God is just the God of the gaps for what you don't know, what science has yet to explain. I see that He's the God of everything we do know, too. He's the God of what we don't know, and the God of what we have yet to discover, and the God of what we have discovered. All of science. I read science textbooks. I'll read all science literature. There's nothing I've read that to me has gone, wow, man, that really puts a ding in my belief in God. Yeah. On the contrary, everything I read, I go, wow, you're taking me to another level of how amazingly complex, beautiful, majestic is the creation that God has made, that He's spoken to in existence. And that's why I can stand in awe and wonder, just blown away, just standing like a little child going, wow, at my Creator and His great love for me and the fact that I'm part of that creation. He crafted me and He wants me and He knows me and He loves me. All of science, all of creation to me points me right back to God, and I love it. It's our everyday constant reminder every time we look around. There's God. There's God. So it's the exact opposite of what the world would tell you. So be bold and say, I'm not going to buy it. Not going to buy it. Anyways, that's all.
So when is your lecture circuit going to begin?
Talk me to death at your rocks.
I know, they're used to it though.
Like Father likes the rain.
Exactly right.
Apples and trees.
Well, that was very well said, very well documented. And so what's the conclusion? What's the result of all of this? 5 weeks of this in a church. I mean...
I survived.
Yes, really, that was a great comment. We really should get you all shirts. I survived this series. Okay, what if we could be today what William Wilberforce and the Clapham group was in the 1800s. William Wilberforce was a politician, British politician, and he had this prayer group called the Clapham group. I'm not saying it right, but it was a small group of people who prayed with him for 20 years, and it took 20 years for him to argue in Parliament month after month, until they finally said, "We will stop enslaving black people. We will make it illegal to own slaves in the English Commonwealth." And so it took 20 years of just persistence and prayer to do that. So what if we could do something like that today?
Sure.
What if we could set people free from the slavery to a belief that is killing their belief in God, that is killing their ability to believe in a God who is a creator?
Right.
I mean, the destruction of slavery was bad. The destruction of the theory of evolution has eternal consequences. At least as a slave, you would have a terrible life and go to heaven. But if you believe evolution all the way, you're probably not going to believe in God that much. In fact, Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous and most vehement evolutionists, he's vehemently anti-God. He says, "I became an atheist after studying evolution." That comment could be replicated by thousands and thousands of students at the high school and college level across the world, probably. We have an obligation as carriers of the truth. Okay, Jesus is the truth. The Bible is true. And now we have scientific evidence that backs up Romans 1:20, that in creation you see the handiwork of God. So we have an obligation to do something about that. Not everybody's going to do the same thing. But someday, some of us, one of us or some of us, needs to stand before the boards of education in Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Hampton, Norfolk, and say, we respectfully disagree with the current educational policy of only teaching the theory of evolution in the public school system. And because of the overwhelming evidence, scientific evidence, that would challenge that theory, we appeal to you to also teach, along with it, the other theory of intelligent design. So I don't know how that's going to happen. I think we need to pray about it as a church. I don't have all the answers how that works out. But I don't think I want to stand before God one day and say, well, I knew all this, but I just kept my mouth shut. Because I didn't want to be called ignorant. Because I didn't want to have people, look at me strange. I don't want to do that. And I want to be a responsible carrier of the truth and be a light. Jesus said, let your light shine before men so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. Well, it took 20 years before they called Wilberforce a hero. But for 19 or so, they called him an idiot, I guess. No, don't talk about that. We're making money off those people. Don't talk about slavery. So there's going to be resistance to it, but I don't think we have any other choice. That whether through, I don't know how we'll all get involved, but at least through prayer and maybe through action, we'll be involved in this. Maybe it'll take 20 years. I got about 20 left. Most of you do. So why not go for it?
Sure.
It's just, so pray about it and let me know what you think and we'll talk about it more. But I want to thank David and Abby and the kids for coming out and Daniel. It's been a great series. I think it'll be on YouTube until somebody shuts us down. For a long time, and also on the church website. So let's stand and pray and we'll close out the service. Well, Lord, I want to thank you that we have come to worship a Creator God today who loves us, who's kind, who's gracious, who has told us the truth about ourselves and about our world. Lord, we want everyone to know you, to have a chance to know how important they are, how valuable, unique, how desired they are of the God who made everything. We want them a chance to know Jesus so they can go to heaven. So God, with all of the time and energy and money we still have left to spend here on earth, we just make ourselves available to you today. You'll show each of us what that means, how that works out. But we know something today that could help people get to heaven. Show us how to use this information. Show us how to be good stewards of what we've learned the past 5 weeks. Show us how to be a light in the community, to shine, to light the path to salvation, to pierce the darkness of false beliefs, of rebellion against God, to pierce the darkness, Lord, with your truth and love. Lord, thank you that you have given us this partnership with Jesus to bring eternal life, salvation, and abundant life to people here on earth so they can enjoy their lives. They can know they're loved. They can know that they were uniquely made by a God who desires to adopt them as his very own children and bring them home to heaven to enjoy the universe forever as sons and daughters of the living God. Lord, we want them to know that. We want them to have a hope that goes beyond the grave. And every problem this world will face, whether it's mitochondrial disease or emotional distress or anything else, that there's a God who's with them and for them and loves them and enjoys them. Lord, help us to do that. And thank you, God, for letting us know that all things do work together. You promised all things do work together for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. So do what the world may do. That's fine. In this world we have tribulation, but Jesus, you've overcome, and because you overcome, we've overcome. We're safe with you. We're loved by you. We're doomed to eternal success with you, Lord, because of your grace. We thank you. We love you. We began the service talking about you. You're beautiful, singing it, and then we heard about it through this talk. You are beautiful, and you've made us beautiful, and we thank you for our beautiful lives. In Jesus' name, amen. 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 Go in peace. God bless you. See you next week. New series, Prayer for Revival.